I am Melissa Forziat. I'm a keynote speaker and the host of this Halt and Catch Fire rewatch podcast. Now, when I speak, my topic is something I call Take the Doughnut, which for me is an expression that's the same as carpe diem, go after what you want in life. The thing that I wanted to do this year was to rewatch Halt and Catch Fire, but this time actually talk about it with people, which has been a novelty for me and a really fun one at that. And now we're up leveling it because I'm getting a chance to talk with people who actually worked on the show, including my guest for today, who I'll introduce in just a moment. This, of course, is going to be another one of the Halt and Catch Fire interviews that I've been dropping. And for those who have not seen the show all the way through, I just want to give a quick heads up on this. Look, the episode recaps are safe for you. They're spoiler free up until the episode that you're on. But these interviews, let's just say they're spoiler filled. I don't know what episodes the guests are going to pull their answers from. So, we could talk about anything that happens in the show here today. Just be aware of that before you jump in. But having said all that, I am really excited to introduce my guest for today, who is Chris McCaleb, who is an editor for 4 episodes of seasons 1 and 2. Welcome, Chris.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
So good to have you here. I'm really excited to talk with you because I'm finding that my brain doesn't naturally think like an editor necessarily. And so when I normally watch the show, that's not the lens I'm looking through, but getting a chance to talk with you about your episodes is going to help introduce for me a whole different perspective on some of those scenes that I probably have missed along the way. So this is going to be exciting, and you'll just have to bear with me.
Yeah, whatever. Let's talk about whatever you want.
Cool. Well, before we get into anything technical, I am curious how you got connected with the show to begin with. What was that process?
So I had been an assistant. I actually started on the show as an assistant editor in season 1. I was working with Kelly Dixon, who is maybe one of the greatest living film editors, and she is one of my mentors and a very good friend. And we were working on the last season of Breaking Bad, and then we went and worked on, and we co-edited an episode of that, and then we went and worked on The Walking Dead, and then Melissa Bernstein, who I know who has come up in this podcast, who's like one of the coolest, best people, smartest people ever. She is one of the executive producers of Halt and Catch Fire, and she, called Kelly because Kelly was one of the, Emmy-winning editors of Breaking Bad, and in Better Call Saul, they were writing at that time. So we did season 1 of Halt before the first season of Better Call Saul. That's right. And and what happened is that Kelly had to leave. I don't remember what she was doing between that and the beginning of Better Call Saul, but she had to leave, and I that's part of how I wound up co-editing the finale with Kevin Ross, is because I wasn't even working with Kevin Ross, who is also now a friend, and it just, I was like the last man standing, and Kevin had to go. Everybody had to like ships had to fly off into the night. Ships flying. That's the wrong metaphor. It's fine. We'll figure it out. We'll mix
That's
metaphors.
Okay. Well, let's do
all
it.
day long.
Let's do this.
Yeah. So this is a long enough story to tell you how I was working with Kelly Dixon, and she edited, I think, 103, 105, and 108. And I had, with her, I edited some scenes in those as well, because she's just really strong, as am I, a really strong proponent of mentorship. And, if you want to be editing, if you're an assistant editor, one of her rules is, get all your work done, but always make sure they see you editing. Make sure that, make sure they know, I want to be an editor, I am an editor, so that when the opportunity arises, they think of you and they go, oh, how about so-and-so?
I love that all the context that you shared there was really lending to this idea that, a lot of shows are happening at once, and you sort of find your people and you're moving between shows if you can. It sounds like, especially through AMC shows, there was a lot of collaboration or even cross hiring that was happening there.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. They like when I mean, I think it probably is the same in any business. You know, if you work with somebody who's good at what they're doing and you like them, you want to keep hiring those people. You want to, keep the family together, as it were. And the other weird, this is not how I got hired on the show, but I weirdly also had run in circles, like almost like not quite meeting circles with Chris Cantwell, one of the creators of the show. He and I, at the same time in 2000, like 6 and 7, I think, had been making nascent web series before they were even called web series. We were calling them video podcasts, which is what this is. But that didn't even exist back then, and web series didn't exist. And he had, I want to say his group was called the Invisible Engine, and I had a company called Big Fantastic, and we were making like soapy dramas on the internet for teens, and they were making like sketch comedy, and then like I think they got like swallowed up into this other company, which got swallowed up into Disney, and then he was an executive, and then he like, I don't know why I'm telling his story. This is his story to tell. But anyway, Chris Cantwell. It's just like small world. I wind up working for him, years later. So
Maybe that happens on every show, but it does feel like, there's something very sort of personal and connected and intimate about Halt and Catch Fire cast and crew. So I don't know. It almost feels like it's especially so on this project. When you are going to actually edit an episode, what kind of process do you go through to make that happen?
and I know Rob. I don't know if everybody's watched all the interviews, but I know Rob touched on this a bit. But as soon as they start shooting an episode, we get the footage the next day usually, or depending if they're shooting in a different location or if they're like on Breaking Bad shooting on film, sometimes there's a couple of days delay. And so a typical television show has 7 to 8 days, a drama, an hour long, 7 to 8 days of production, and then we'll have, depending on the show, 2 to 4 days after to finish our cut. So the first step is really just watching all the dailies, which that sounds like a very obvious thing, but I think a lot of there. I've met some people who I won't call out, but and not Halt and Catch Fire people, but there are editors who just use this function where there's a script and they just go line by line. They look at every performance, and I think you really miss the nuance if you do that. And one of the things I learned from Kelly is you watch from start to finish. You watch everything and you absorb it. You get to know all the material. You make little marks in the Avid. The Avid's the editing software. Avid Media Composer. If you're for being technical, if you want to be an editor, it's pretty much the industry standard. Adobe Premiere is a great place to start learning, but Avid, it's a much more robust platform for editing, and it's what a lot of people use in the industry. And wow, I derailed myself.
Well,
Awesome.
in terms of the process, you watch the dailies. It sounds like you don't really know exactly what you're looking for in that initial pass through the dailies, unless maybe somebody nudges you and says, "Hey, this particular take was awesome." Like you're just absorbing it, getting a feel for it, and then you go through that. Go through
They
Avid.
do. They do make those notes, and they tell you this is my select, this is the best for this is the best for that, and you keep those notes in mind. But you also, you want to have a fresh perspective on it as the editor, and so you start with the script and you start with the notes that come back from set, but you watch everything because what you see on set, what you see live, it doesn't always translate to the screen. It doesn't always work the way you think it will. And sometimes to get in and out of a certain moment, of a certain performance, in a certain angle, you can't use that other thing. And so you need, as the editor, to know the material so well that you can solve any problem that comes your way, which is, oh, how do I get from there to there? But that performance so you need to be able to find those moments, And so what I do, yeah, I watch everything. I make little notes in things. It takes, it takes if you have 4 hours of dailies, it can take 6 to 8 hours to watch that just because, you're making your notes and then you start kind of thinking, well, where do I want to be to tell the story of this scene from the beginning to the end, and how do I want to work my way in? And the traditional way is you start wide and then you start moving in slowly, and that works really well. But sometimes and another thing I learned from Kelly is you kind of always want to keep your eyes out for an alternate way in, like an alternate way just to like, I don't know, keep it creative, keep it give it an energy that it didn't necessarily, wasn't the intention. If that makes sense.
Yeah, as you talk about it, it just seems like editors must have to have an incredible understanding of timing, where the story is going. It just you can a lot can change, and it can change because of what you did in
Hmm.
the edit. And I don't know, I just find that so powerful the way you described what you do. It's like you really do dictate how we experience all of that footage that was gathered. And it's you got to have some skill set to get that done.
Well, you hope so. You
Mm-hmm.
definitely hope that people have that skill set, but I think, yeah, it starts with that script, and it starts with, like you just said, a story and these characters. And depending on the thing that you're editing, sometimes you're thinking of the stories first, sometimes you're thinking of the characters first. It all depends on, the needs of that particular story or scene are.
How much do you know about where the show, or maybe the season is headed when you're editing? And I'm just going to call out for people which episodes you worked on here, because I think there might be a difference between some of them in that answer. So you in season 1 you worked on episode 10, the final episode of that season. Then in season 2 you worked on 203, 206, and 209. So sort of different points in the season. So, when you're working on the finale of a season or the beginning of a season, how much do you know about what the road is ahead for the show?
Usually not that much. It all depends on what stage the writers are with the scripts. Ideally, I think it's always better to be. I mean, if you could have everything written before you start shooting, you're in the best shape possible. It doesn't mean you can't make changes, but it definitely allows you to figure out story problems, because that always come up. I mean, even in the best scripted, best, even in, like, a Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul, sometimes things happen, and you have to eliminate a story thread, or you have to take this or that out for time. Sometimes you have to, these episodes, less so now, but anything that's on commercial television, it usually has to fit in this, like, certain box, and sometimes you have to take things out, and that can pull at these narrative threads. And so, you have to be a little bit nimble when you're putting those story beats together. But we often, as is the case, they only have a couple of scripts written. Maybe they have outlines on other episodes, but we don't necessarily have all that information. And I think as an editor, I'll often ask the showrunners, the writers. I'll say, hey, there's this moment in this scene, and I'm just trying to understand, like, where, like, how to play it, like, where is this going? And they'll give me that kind of information. They're not withholding it necessarily. Sometimes they just don't have it, or they're still working on it. But also, as a fan of story, I don't always want all of the information. I want to read the scripts. It's because as when you work on something, you don't get to watch it. You know, that you're the closest thing you have to experiencing it is reading that script the first time. You know, the wonder, the excitement, you know, the newness, and I try to preserve that as much as I can, and not necessarily, you know, get more information as just like pieces of information, like spoilers, basically. I try to I usually try to keep it fresh and not know that, but I because the characters, they don't necessarily know where things are going, so you know, I try to, I don't want to lead. I like being with them instead of like way ahead of them.
Hmm.
If that makes sense.
It does. I don't know if you would know the answer to this question because it's not really from your perspective, but do you know if like what you present in an edit ever changes the writer's like, oh, the way that you just edited this might actually influence how they write the next episode or how they thought about something that they hadn't considered before. Do you know if any have there been any examples for you of your edit actually shifting the way a creator thought about the show or a writer thought about the show?
I mean, well, it's interesting. Yes, I would point to, I'm trying to think of what can I say. Um, well, I can certainly point to Narcos. I worked on season 3 of Narcos, and it's a very collaborative environment story wise, and I've never at that time, I had never really worked on anything quite like it, where we were putting things together. We were saying, you know, I really think it'd be better if there was a scene where this happened, and we would kind of pitch it to the writers, and they would say, "Oh yeah, that's a good idea," and then they would write a scene like that. They would shoot it. They would get it back, and we would incorporate it into the episode. Um, I could think of another example where on Better Call Saul, I can't remember if we also had a podcast for Better Call Saul. I was one of the hosts of it, and it was sort of like the behind the scenes of every episode. We had the creators and crew members and cast and stuff. And so if you like Better Call Saul and you don't know the Insider podcast, it's all out there. Um,
What's the name of that podcast?
it's called the Better Call Saul Insider Podcast.
Okay,
It
guys.
was it started with the Breaking Bad Insider Podcast, which Kelly Dixon started, and then we rolled into Saul. And even once she left, she continued to kind of co-host the show. Um, but but we I can't, on there was an episode with this incredible montage in episode 207 of Better Call Saul. It's the if you've seen it, it's the inflatable man montage where Jimmy is kind of like stepping his toe into being Saul. And this is good Halt and Catch Fire talk, right? And we just were like, this montage isn't quite a montage, and it really, and Kelly, we were both talking to the writers kind of early on, as early as we could, to say, I don't know, we just think it could be more, it should be more, and then they wound up writing and shooting a whole bunch of more stuff, and that was, I mean, it's a great montage, and you know, I give all of that credit to Kelly for making it as great as it was. So
Wow. So there really is a lot of influence potentially in the process of what you're doing with what happens later. Let's talk about some of the scenes from the episodes that you worked on here. So
sure.
if we start, I guess we'll just start in order. So 110, which was called 1984. So what really strikes me about this one, it's sort of a big picture question here, but you know, this is a season finale. And you know, it's coming off of a pretty pivotal one. You know, 109 was sort of like everything kind of goes up in flames on the show.
Hmm.
And so
Right.
like you're kind of having to reset the story in a way, and a lot of major plot developments are happening here fairly quickly. So I've actually made a list for myself of some of the things that are happening here. I mean, we've got Joe and Gordon convincing Nathan Cardiff to keep the company, to make them the leaders of it. They get their first shipment of the giant and they test it. Joe burns it all and goes completely off
Yep.
the grid. You know, that's just one set of people there. And then we've got Cam. She gets a job at a phone company. And then she leaves that job, like in the same episode, she leaves that job to start Mutiny. She takes all the programmers with her.
Hmm.
And ultimately, Donna is going to leave TI. She's going to get carjacked. She's going to have a crisis of faith. She's going to decide to work at Mutiny. We see her and Cam at Mutiny before the episode ends. I mean, this is a lot of stuff, a lot of really big stuff. And instead of just time jumping and saying, oh, here we are now, and giving all of that in exposition, you do it in an episode. So, as an
Hmm.
editor, when you get all of that, how do you like what are the things that you do to make sure that everything feels like it's paced appropriately, that it feels separate enough, that it feels like the important stuff is important, with just so many big details being thrown at you? How do you approach something like that?
I mean, it does start with the script, and that happened to be a really good script. And I remember feeling like, because 109, it is like in almost every way like the climax of the season, and so then the finale, rather than like build, it's kind of this long, like the air coming out of the sails, this kind of long denouement, which could have been really boring. It could have been um, because for lack of a better word, the previous episode was so action packed, even though it's not traditional, action. There was so much going on, and what the show did really well, and I think only got better and better once they got rid of me. They didn't get. I wish I could have worked on all seasons. I was not available, unfortunately. But the show, it is. I think it's a rare example of a show that just got better and better and better and better as it went along. And I think that first season, it was really finding itself. And what I think the show did really well is it rooted things so squarely in the emotional reality for the characters, for each character. And that four characters are so different from each other, and they're so richly drawn and amazingly performed. And I think so when you're trying to keep, like you asked, how you're trying to keep the pacing up, you're trying to keep the momentum, when it really is just it's a lot of it is aftermath, and people, Joe being sent off into literally the wilderness, or Cam and Donna going off and doing their own thing, and I think you just sort of, you rely on the script, but and you rely on instinct too. I mean, there's a certain feeling to editing. There's a certain musicality to it, and that's a big part of how I write. Is kind of like finding the music of it, and not not always by using music, but just sort of like finding those rhythms. And I've edited several things that are shot in other languages, and it it there's a challenge to it if you don't speak the language, but there's something about rhythm and performance that even if you don't have a fluent understanding of the actual words, you can find that rhythm, and then you can check, to see, like, is this correct? Does this make sense? And then you also, the more you hear it, the more you start to understand what's being said. So
That
I don't
seems
know
like
if I
a
answered your question at all.
That does, and what you added seems like a really interesting challenge. I know that editing in a different language wasn't, other than English, wasn't a factor for Halt, but the fact that I would never have even thought that an editor would take something like that on. So that's really interesting. That sounds like it's something you've done more than once.
Yeah, Narcos for sure. There are multiple languages being spoken. And on Better Call Saul, we had a lot of Spanish. We had some German. Um, I'm sure there's something I'm forget. Patriot. We definitely had some French. Um,
Wow.
yeah, this was it probably Spanish and Perpetual Grace Limited. A show,
So,
by the way, so few people have seen or heard of that show, and it was on a network nobody knew about. But I definitely recommend that Perpetual Grace Limited. If you can find it, it's a great show.
wow.
Only
Everybody,
one
you're getting
season.
show and podcast recommendations here. There's a lot of work to do. But it sounds like the rhythm is really what drives you through all of it.
Mhm.
And with your point about like sort of the personal moments, that does lead into something I wanted to ask about 203, which is called the way in. I guess there's a couple different types of questions we can ask here, but if we start bigger picture, in this episode, there are a lot of really beautiful, very deep, very personal character moments. And there, a couple sequences that fit into that for me are like, Boz finding a way to be part of his son's rehearsal dinner, even though he's sort of outside for the whole thing. And there's just so much there, even though there's a lot of stillness in those scenes. And then, Cam and Tom getting closer through Cam's panic attack. It's just the whole episode feels very intimate to me. And it's in the context of a show where there are often a lot of intense and fast-paced things happening. So how do you kind of highlight those moments? I know you want to get into the Tom and Cam scene more specifically, but let's talk generally for a moment here on an episode that has a lot of sort of quieter moments.
Well, I would give a lot of credit to a few things. One, to answer your first question about Boz, like you point an actor at Toby Huss's face, and it's so expressive. And even if he's not doing anything, it's that movie star quality that you just can't learn it, you can't fake it. He just feels like he's there and he's living a real experience, and you're that stuff's gold, which is another reason why you have to watch all your dailies, aspiring editors, because you find those moments, you find those quiet moments. Those aren't necessarily reflected in dialogue. You sometimes sometimes it's not even part of what they're shooting necessarily. Sometimes the actor is just doing something that tells that story in a look, and instead of needing 5 lines of dialogue. Um, Along those, oh, and also I was gonna say the director too, Jeff Freilich, who's also one of I think he was the line producer, um, and he's, I think, is he an EP? I forget what he is on the show, but he also directed that episode, and he did such a great job um, capturing some of those great emotional moments. And to what I was saying right before that about dialogue, like sometimes you write something, the writers, they write something, and it it seems necessary in the script on the page for the characters to have this exchange of dialogue. But what we found in that episode specifically, there's a scene. It's after Tom and Cameron are they're kind of like at odds, and he's got the tennis ball and he's rudely throwing it, which is deceptively difficult to edit because you want to have, again, rhythm, but the actor isn't on the same rhythm every time, and so you have to force it into a rhythm. But there was a scene immediately after in Cameron's room, and it starts with her. There's the knife into the tennis ball into the wall, and the scene, as written, it was Tom and Cameron kind of having more words. They were yelling at each other, and Tom storms out and leaves Cameron kind of upset. And it it felt redundant to have them have this kind of like almost like teenage argument in some ways, and it was no fault of the directing or the acting or the writing. It just, once you had the previous scene, and then later you have the more emotional scene where they come together when she's having that panic attack. This particular scene, this like argument, this bickering, it undermined the previous scene, and then it undermined the later scene. And we were like, what are we gonna do? But you need the moment. you need Cameron to have this moment. And so what we did was we're like, well, what if we just got rid of Tom and it was just a scene about Cameron wordlessly trying to figure it out. And so I took literally, I mined every moment of footage where she was emoting, thinking, doing things. Some of it was scripted, some of it was just stuff the actor was doing, and then in a couple of shots, we just sort of digitally got rid of Tom, and we made it a scene where it was the same idea. It was Cameron just like not able to express herself and being kind of, but it was more internal, and it said everything that the scene needed to say without saying it in words, and it was a much more emotionally rooted way to tell it, and I think that we all the creators and Jonathan Lisco, who was, they were all show running together in those first couple seasons. I think we were really proud of sort of like taking that scene, which was good, and then just you just didn't need all the dialogue. And so, I think some of the best writers won't necessarily be precious about things. They'll say, well, what if we just got rid of that? And a testament to them, they were open to, you know, the most efficient way to tell a story.
I've got to say, at that point in this show, we've only seen Tom for one episode before that.
Mhm.
And at that point in the show, I think that you're meant to see the strength of the draw between Joe and Cam. But as a viewer, when I looked at Joe and when I looked at Cam and I looked at what I had seen about their relationship, I just didn't think that was a healthy choice for either of them. And I did not yet want them to, I didn't want them to be together at this point.
No.
I wanted Cam to have another choice. And so when I saw that episode, and we're only one episode after he's arrived on the scene and he's kind of stirring up trouble and he's getting hired, but he probably should have been sued, that's not an episode where you're meant to think that there's this like great bond between Tom and Cam. But then the very
Right.
next one, I came away from 203. I remember on my first watch thinking, boy, this would be a better choice for Cam.
Oh yeah.
This is a way healthier option, I think. So there's an underlying support there, even in their arguments, which is probably a credit to the fact that that scene was cut the way that it was, because I don't know if I had heard the words, if I would have felt that way. But in this one episode, I come away having just met Tom thinking, I want more. I want more with these two. And I think there's something really good there. And that had to have happened in the work that you did. And now hearing about that scene that was taken away, kind of blows my mind. I'm glad I didn't see it with that.
Yeah, it's because it also, yeah, not only do you not need it, but it makes everything more believable when you don't have it, and you have this kind of gap in time between them arguing, and you let you approach it more from Cameron's perspective, which is, I mean, she's one of the lead stars of the show, one of the main characters, and it's like so compelling to watch like all the time. Yeah, she's another one who just turn the camera on. Her face is just doing something. It's crazy.
Well, and I also think that by removing, I don't know what the dialogue was that was removed, but I
don't even remember.
I think it gives you space to consider that the thing that she's fuming about in the room is that she maybe knows there's something about what he's saying that's right. Whereas if they had been having words, she would have had to be more fixed in her position. So I think
she was, digging herself in, and because she can't admit it, even if she knows he's right.
Yeah. So I mean, this gives you room to interpret it in all those different ways instead. Oh, very cool. So let's talk about 206, which is an episode called 10 Broad 36. One of the things that I find really fascinating about this show is that there are a lot of people who love it. And some of those people have a lot of technical knowledge Some of them do not. And somehow you have to walk that line for everybody. So there's a whole sequence in this episode where I think that line is very fine and you have to walk it the whole way through. And it's that whole bit where it's sort of like becomes a heist movie at some point where it's
Yep.
like the whole team, they're trying to stick it to Joe, and he's made a series of demands about the improvements he needs them to make for the platform in order for them to get the lower rate to use the server that his company has.
Right.
And so they know what he wants them to do, but they don't want to do it for all these various reasons. And so instead, they're going to go through this incredibly complicated way of tricking him into thinking that they've done the changes. And in all of this, there's so much technical exposition that we have to get through to understand what are they actually going to do that's going to be the trick. And then we have to see it play out. We have to know when it's working and when it isn't. And, it's interesting because as somebody who doesn't have any of that technical knowledge, yet getting a lot of technical information, I felt that I still understood what was supposed to be happening in the story and when things were happening that were good or bad for either side. So when you work on something like this, especially if you have the technical knowledge either, how do you convey all of this to satisfy both the people who know a lot about the subject matter and the people who don't?
It's a good question. I think, and again, hopefully it starts with the script. And I think, did Zach Whedon write that one? I think maybe.
I'm gonna have to double check
Um,
that. Keep talking and
we'll see if I'm right, but if my memory is correct. But a lot of it comes also from the technical consultants, which the show had. Carl Ledbetter was one of them, and you can look him up too. Just if you're at home or you're at work, if you're in the car, don't look it up right now. Why are you watching this in the car? Come on, this is the. Also, why are you watching this if you haven't watched the show? Come on, watch the show. Stop the interview. Okay, watch all these episodes, but do them on mute. Watch the show, and then come back rewatch the podcast. But
way to keep it running. Zach did not do
yeah,
this episode.
he didn't. Well,
Mm-mm.
I'm so wrong. Who did write this one?
That one may take a little bit more effort for me to find, but I
That's
can
all
do
right.
it. I'm
Um,
convinced that I can do it.
uh,
Keep
but
keep filling the time and we'll get there.
yeah, but the technical consultants, they would work with the writers would work with them, and especially on an episode like that, where, like you said, there's so much jargon and there's so many like words and concepts being thrown at you. Um, a big part was about, and the showrunners were very, they wanted it to be as accurate as possible, as technically accurate as possible, while still serving the emotional heart of the show. So sometimes we had to make a choice between accuracy and like emotional accuracy. And I think that it could go both ways depending on the situation. But Carl was always there to say, actually, it would have been like this, and so he and I forget that the other technical consultant, at least on those first two seasons, but it's in the credits. But like, yeah, that we would get their notes on the script, and then we would get notes, I think, from set, which would be like, Carl says that you wouldn't see this, or that this is not accurate to the time period, or whatever, and so there. I think occasionally liberties were taken with that, but we did try to keep it as accurate as possible. And so then, to answer your question, uh, it as an editor, it's about um, presenting that information in the clearest way possible from when the characters sound like they know what they're talking about, and visually you're either seeing what they're talking about or you're seeing that they know what they're talking about. It's sort of like some Shakespeare where we may not know the words and what the words mean because language has changed since then, and he was writing in his own vernacular and making up words also, which is crazy that Shakespeare did that. And now we use those words. but you see, even a modern audience, even when you're a kid, when you see an actor speaking Shakespeare, even if you don't know what the words mean, you know what they're talking about. And I don't know if that explains what I'm trying to say, but that it's about presenting those words in an emotional way and those concepts in an emotional way and having them and then having them represented visually as much as possible. Like when there's that scene where they're trying to figure out and they realize they can use the coax cable when they stumble upon broadband, basically. And the camera is just constantly going around them, and the characters are just like bouncing off each other, and we're watching how ideas get made, and we're seeing how they're coming up with them, and so you try to balance uh, a jargon dump with keeping it rooted in the emotion of the scene and the characters and like what they need, what they want, and stuff like that.
Hmm. And I think this was Jamie Pacino. Is that how you say that name? Jamie Pacino, the writer?
I think that's right.
Okay. Yeah. So that's who
Sorry,
wrote this
Jamie, if we're
one.
wrong.
Yeah. Awesome. Emotion obviously is underpinning just about everything that you did here, and maybe even more so on this show than others, or maybe the exact same amount. But I think that's why people feel so connected to the show, that they feel a deep connection to the characters themselves because of how everything's coming across. So I have to tell you, for me, the most upsetting scene in the entire series, and I know that there will be people who point to stuff that comes later in the series when they say name the most upsetting thing that happened for you. The most upsetting thing for me is episode 209, Kelly, where Gordon falls down the stairs, and I just shudder when I even think about it. Okay, just the how close the camera is to it, the sounds, it's horrific, and I can't even. I'm trying to get the question out. What Tell us about this sequence? What do you work on? Because I imagine there was some complexity here, maybe with a stunt double, or like there probably
Oh
was
yeah.
footage that wasn't Gordon trying to be Gordon. There's probably a lot of pieces you had to assemble in the edit. So how did you make this so horrific for me?
I think I'll in order of I think the number one credit go and you already said it goes to the sound. The sound is really telling your brain that was really bad. And then the stunt, yeah, it's a stunt performer who was great. And then the way that it was shot, uh, there were, if memory serves, there were two or three even cameras when they did the stunt, and then they shot it in such a way that when we do pick up the actor, it was done very, it was done in a way that we could put it together seamlessly to where we're back with Scoot, who played Gordon, and uh, yeah, that's a big part of it is that it's tough when you shoot a stunt performer who are they're really when they say like, oh, that actor didn't do their own stunts. Well, somebody did the stunt, and these stunt performers are like the unsung heroes of Hollywood. I like I worked on the movie Collateral a long 20 years ago, 21 years ago. Oh no, it's all happening. Time is moving too quickly. But it was I was there the day they flipped the cab, and there's like a driver really. They kind of launch it a little bit, so there's some movie trickery that happens, but there's really a guy in a car that then coo, 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 and they love it. They act, stunt performers live for that stuff. And they live for like taking a fall downstairs and having it look as like violent as possible. And so some of that was the stunt performance, which was really effective. Some of it is the sound, which is gruesome and echoey. That helps too. It just and it's. I think anytime you've been in a stairwell, it's like this could be bad, right? Like if I get stuck in here, that'd be really bad. And then Gordon's performance picking it back up, like that guy is such a great actor, and so I think it all comes together, and then it's finding the way to edit it to where to maximize the brutality and kind of like those hits, and you sometimes you kind of upcut it a little bit where maybe you take a frame out where it just gets a little jerky or a little bit more violent, and and then like I said, the sound, and just the echo chamber of him when he's help, like
Even the
that's like
fall
it's
echoes.
oh yeah, yeah. It's and it's yeah, it's like it's everybody's worst nightmare, and so you're seeing it, laid out before you. And also, I think some of that comes from the moments before of that, just kind of going around the same area and be like, and getting lost. I think we've all had that experience too, where you're like, this looks the same, but am I in the wrong place? And then knowing, just getting into his mental state. Um, yeah, I think that informs your kind of horror with that scene too.
Yeah. Oh, bang up job, literally.
Oh,
Wow. That such I mean, it's so effective. I just had to ask you about that to understand how it all happened. But
I'm glad you liked it.
I mean, like is a strange word to use for it. It hurts. It like hurts to watch
Glad
it.
you
But
were
I think,
impacted by it.
yeah, for all of the reasons that you said. And I think you're right. When I get there in this rewatch, which this will probably come out after after I've already been there, but on this rewatch I really want to examine how him circling that garage before we even have the fall impacted me as well, because I think there's
Mhm.
already kind of a claustrophobia about it. And then it's an even smaller space. Like the fact that you said there might have been a few different camera angles, it's like, where do you even put them in that space? So it's
It's hard.
yeah. So, wow. Well, I know there's a scene that you really wanted to talk about in this one, and that is you mentioned your favorite thing to do on this show was this sequence where Sonaris wipes out Westnet.
Yeah.
What did you love about this one?
Well, I loved it even starting in the script because I even when she makes bad decisions, I really love Cameron and I root for her. And so as I'm trying to remember. I love a cross-cutting montage where or sequence where this isn't really a montage, but kind of, where multiple things are happening at once and we're seeing like many story threads kind of coming together to a climax at the same time. I love stuff like that. The way it's written and the way it plays out, visually. And so, one thing we haven't talked about really at all, and I know you've talked about it, at least you talked about it with Rob Komatsu, is the music on the show, which is I just I can't say enough good things about the music. The score, Paul's score throughout is just extraordinary and and perfect for the show. But also, Thomas Golubic, who I have had the very good fortune of getting to work with many times. I mean, he was on Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, and he was on The Walking Dead when I was there, and he was on this. And he and his team they approach things from a perspective that most music supervisors just don't. They approach it from a depth of understanding of story and character and emotion that, and I know I don't want to be too redundant about what Rob said, but a lot of times they'll music supervisor will just send you some songs, or they'll send you like 1,000 songs, and they go figure it out. Thomas and his team, they go through and they'll present very specific songs, and they'll say, and here's why, and they'll give you options, and they're almost always great options. So then it's the difficulty of choosing your best great option. I can't say enough good things about Thomas and his team. They're genius for real. And so, having said that, I that sequence, it was written in the script, was the Joy Division song "She's Lost Control," and which is I love Joy Division. I love New Order more than Joy Division. Sorry, Joy Division heads. Um, but I listened to that song, and when I was reading the script, because I saw it and I said, "Oh, I'll fire up the you know the song," and thinking about it, I immediately was struck by the production of it and the quality of his vocals. Ian Curtis, the singer from Joy Division, and I was like, I don't think this works because the if you listen to the Joy Division version, which again was in the script, it his vocals are really kind of out of tune, and the song is messy and chaotic, which is great. I mean, it's a great song, but for this sequence, which has to build and have momentum, it it's almost like counter to that. It doesn't have the natural build that I at least felt the sequence should have, and because it's this like kind of devious thing that happens, and it's also a little bit difficult to convey because visually nothing really is happening like physically. There's code is being deployed on a computer and it's wiping shit out. Sorry, stuff. I don't know if we can swear. And so it's about rooting that in everybody's reaction to it. And for whatever reason, I just felt like the song it didn't have the kind of like I mean, there's a reason I just turned a page because I have a note. I have a pronunciation note in a second, but I just think it's I just thought that, and then as I started cutting with it, I was confirmed it like it just doesn't work. And so I listened to as many covers as I could. I sought out every cover of She's Lost Control, and I stumbled upon this one, which it's actually now quite hard to find. I mean, you can find it on YouTube, but it's the Ravenettes, which is a group that I had liked, and they're doing it, and then the song was I don't know if it was remixed or produced by Muller, who is an electronic musician who coincidentally is the composer of the main title of Halt and Catch Fire. He did
Yeah.
that music, which side note, that music, I think the Halt and Catch Fire main title is the best main title of any show ever of all time. I would listen anytime I was feeling blocked or low or whatever, was having an off day. I would just in my editing room, I would just fire up the main title, play the names and all of that, and the colors and the graphics and that music, and it would just pump me up. It would get me so fired up, and so I love that music. But so I found that and was like, oh, this is great. It captures the kind of primal ferocity that the Joy Division song has, but it it's it's more modern production, and B, it just follows a rhythm that's I think builds and has more momentum, and so I cut it to that. And I had to fight for it because covers are difficult because they're usually harder to clear. There's legalities about so it can be costly, so it can be it can be more expensive, it can be or it can be impossible sometimes. And we tried to find alternatives, we tried to find other ways to do it, but it just played so well, and we made very few changes from what my original cut was to the cut that's in the finished show. It just like as it was shot, I was hearing it, I was seeing it, I was seeing how it could go with this particular uh, thing, and felt like we weren't going to be able to get it. They were like Thomas said, I don't know if we're gonna be able to do it. And the only time I've been more scared of losing the song that we were using was in Better Call Saul. In episode 610, there's this montage that happens, And it was written again. It was written into the script. They were using this particular piece of music, which is from the TV show Mission Impossible. By It was composed by Lalo Schifrin, and it was so perfect. They shot with it on set. It was just like it was the vibe, and it was not until the like a couple days before the final mix, I think, that we finally got it. It was this like Sisyphean task of like getting it cleared and paying for it, and thank God that, that Thomas and his team were able to make that happen. And that's the other part of a music supervisor's job. It's such a hard job to be able to think of the music, to know all the music, and then to think, wow, this scene, this sequence, this should sound like that. This would be perfect, or so would this, or so would this. Then they have to be able to have the relationships with all these companies to then contact them, get the clearances. Sometimes things are in like boxes in a storage room in Idaho or wherever, and they have to find these things, and that's what part of what his team does. It's a crazy, weird, like it's a crazy, like multi-pronged job. So,
Well, I will
uh,
say that it will have dropped by the time this interview drops. I did get a chance to speak with Thomas Golovich, and that
yay!
man's brain,
Yeah.
everything you just described was my experience listening to him. Like it's just like he has file folders in his brain for everything. And
Yep.
if you haven't gotten a chance to listen to that one, everybody go back and watch that one now.
Oh yeah,
Because
and
wow.
he's so articulate, and he's so good at communicating, and he's able to. I can't say enough good things about him. I mean, he's. I've been very lucky to get to work with him a number of times, I, I I hope to do that again soon in the future.
That's amazing. Well, I know we're coming right up on time here, but I wanted to check in. Is there anything that's come out recently or that you're working on that you want people to know about that you can't talk about?
Well, the thing I'm working on right now, I can't talk about. Um, but I had recently done another thing that I couldn't talk about for like a year, which was I worked on this Marvel series called Echo, and which I'm proud of the work that we did on that. That's like a Marvel Disney Plus Hulu show, and so you can check that out. I worked on that for quite a while. And then I let's see, what else did I work on? Oh, and then I guess I don't. Oh boy, and then I'm about to start working on something else that I also can't talk about. It's so like I'm not like working it for the CIA, like I or am I?
Well, I guess
Um,
we'll find out in like 2 years.
yeah, yeah, yes. But yeah, you know, let, yeah, I guess yeah, Echo is the most recent thing that I did, and then I'm working on something now that I don't know when will come out, and then I'm about to start working on something that I don't know when it'll come out. So,
So
but
everybody keep up with Chris's IMDb
yeah, I guess
profile.
just yeah, we're in yeah. And I guess the best way to reach me is probably on Instagram. I don't post that much, but I do. I used to post a lot more, but then I don't know. I started like being more into real life and living my life with my fiance, and it's just like I don't post as much as I used to, and I've also been very busy, which is good because it's been a very difficult time for our industry, and I've been very lucky to be working on things that had either already been shot or so that strikes didn't shut things down. But yeah, it's been a very precarious time for our business, and I've been very lucky to be working on some really good stuff with good people. But and almost none of it I can talk about. So
That's okay,
that's
but you've dropped
annoying.
a
But
podcast we can watch. You dropped Echo, so those are all things that we can go check out. And thank you so much for taking some time to talk about *Halt and Catch Fire* and going back and rewatching those episodes and really getting into it with me.
Oh, it was a pleasure. I'm glad that you're doing this. I'm glad that every time I meet somebody who has discovered this show, it always makes me feel good because they always are like, "How did I not know this show was going on when it was going on?" And it didn't have the highest ratings, but they believed in it enough. It's a huge testament to AMC that they believed in it enough to keep bringing it back and to empower this kind of storytelling because I mean all you have to do is get I mean once you get to that Goodwill episode, which is my favorite episode, then Cantwell directed that, and I mean I was just like I was just a fan at that point, and I just like ugly cried my eyes out by I'm like alone. Just that's such a that's heartbreaking. And I know you talked about the episode that precedes it when you talked to Rob Komatsu. And obviously the Goodwill episode doesn't work without the previous episode. But I just can't say enough about that. I think about it. I mean, I think about it all the time. It's a great episode.
Well, there's a lot for us to explore here. And, I really appreciate you doing this interview because I think having all these different perspectives onto the show, even all these years later, I think it just adds to how we all understand what happened in the show. And also, I think, gives us a deeper appreciation for the art itself. So thank you so much for carving out the time to do this. And
Oh, my pleasure. It was
and to
fun.
everybody who's watching, go out there and watch Halt and Catch Fire. Bye, everyone.